Hello, everybody. Welcome to UCGIS Week Day 2. I'm really excited for this session that we have this afternoon on Indigenous geographies. We have two presentations today. We'll actually do questions after each session. And up first, we have Dr. Donna Miranda Begay, and she joins us from California Tribal GIS. Dr. Donna, take it away.
Yes. Can you see my PowerPoint? It's up on the screen.
Yes.
Okay. Well, hello, everybody. Tumadak, Tangwang Naang, Donna Miranda Begay, Tabatalabal T, Navajo Key, Halaki, Lake Isabella, Weldon, California. Just introduce myself in Tabatalabal language. I'm actually connecting from Kern Valley, about an hour northeast of Bakersfield. And I just wanted to talk about the the effort that we had made in having the first California Native American Tribal GIS Summit, and also talking a little bit about decolonizing mapping and ground truthing efforts, example by North Fork Mono Tribe, one of the presentations that was at the summit, and also a little bit about GIS data sovereignty. So I'll get started here. Moving on to the second slide here, our summit was about the theme was honoring place and empowering nations. Um, and July 31st and August 1st was when we had the summit, and it was free. And we also made sure that we were focusing on natural resource management, environmental justice support, and protection of cultural landscapes. And again, it was our first time having this in California for mainly the California Native American tribes. We did have a lot of offers for different topics in the very beginning, and we were able to narrow them down to these six major categories. I won't read them all off here, but you can see the focus of the conference there. And then yes, we asked the question, why do we need to have a California Tribal GIS Summit? And pretty much I was looking at the fact that there's 109 federally recognized tribes in California and about 40 plus tribes that are seeking federal recognition. And there's a lot of movement and activity in the areas of land back, rematriation, co-stewardship, cultural burns, also known as good fire, conservation, and protection of cultural landscapes. Also, tribes were obtaining natural resource-based grants that required GIS-based reporting and file creations. And so they needed to understand about the use of the applications. And CAL FIRE is a good example who require this when you get a grant with them. And then also tribes understand the strengthening of their sovereignty by managing their own GIS environments and their cultural sensitive GIS data. Tribes also wanted to correct historical mapping, such as ground truthing and truth and healing. And this requires up-to-date mapping and story map narratives. Also, we all experienced, of course, the federal changes in services and funding. And so in order to be more resilient during these times, it's important to build up our GIS knowledge. And so tribes were looking at that as supporting their today's tribal sovereignty in their communities. In the past couple of years, I've had an opportunity to experience going out and taking a look at post-cultural burns, such as Sedgwick Reserve, and up in the north, the Yurok women, all-led women crew that helps to teach folks on cultural burns. And very nice to see that. I also have a documentary called, I think it's called some Good Fire. And then on the right, UC Davis, researchers are out there doing land surveys for the California tribal allotment lands. These are lands that a lot of folks don't realize that there's reservations, rancherias, and allotment lands in California. And there's about 300 of them. And they're sitting there right below my property. There's a cultural site, and I'm taking them on a cultural tour. And in the center there's the conservation bearers, we call ourselves, that are with the Mojave Land Trust group folks, and working with the Native Lands Trust folks. Yeah, there's all kinds of activities, like I said, happening in California for tribes, and I've been fortunate to be able to be part of that. In the lower right is I'm on site teaching, I think it's called Bear River Roanert tribe on how to do drone flying. So the summit itself, getting back to that, we were trying to establish like that draft agenda items on the right for 2 days. And we decided to build this from the bottom up. I threw out an email on January 21st this year saying to a few friends of mine that work for the state and federal government, saying, hey, I'm thinking about this idea about having a GIS summit. And right away, the water board replied back that it sounds like a great idea. So we had a shared vision on what we wanted to do as co-hosts. We planned out these meetings, invited a lot of the tribes and our partners that had an interest in GIS for, natural resource management, EJ, and protecting of cultural sites. So our momentum built and we got going. And so then the governor's office and also both Natural Resources Agency and Cal EPA started to really offer their support for the effort. So we were pretty happy with getting this effort going. So from February 5th through June 25th, there was planning going on. And so by July, we pretty much had these two agenda days, day one and day two available. I'm going to be making sure that the PDF, this PowerPoint will be offered in a PDF format, and that these links will go to Google Drives, my Google Drives. I have all the webinars for these 2 days, except for day two. There's a couple in the morning that we missed, unfortunately, but starting at 9:10 a.m., we were able to start recording our webinars with no problem. But anyway, the webinar recordings will be available, and all the presentations, the PDFs, all the presenters pretty much provided a PDF for their presentations. So you can access that. And again, there's really good topics there. So yeah. Again, getting back to the summit, out of the 109 federally recognized tribes and 40 non-federally recognized tribes, we had 90 tribes represented at this conference or summit. And off to the right, you can see a ArcGIS Pro map that was generated with the help of state parks. And there was 280 people participated in person and 230 virtually. And there was a lot of networking amongst the tribes and the federal folks, the state folks, nonprofits, and the academics. And so that was going really, really well. Also, too, we had used on the technical end, on the back end, we used ArcGIS, the survey 123, online for generating ways to organize our summit, like being able to do registration and getting the presenters PDFs and then exhibitors information, sponsors information, and conducting workshop surveys on how we're doing with the summit. And then I used my GoDaddy website to create the web pages to make sure that we're staying on track with keeping everybody informed on how things are going with the summit. And finally, there's all these folks that were on the planning team. They attended those 7 planning meetings and really helped us nail down what we needed to do. And again, special thank you to the Water Board's Office of Public Engagement, Equity, and Tribal Affairs. Again, like I said, on the 21st, I threw out an email, and in 9 minutes, I got a reply back from the office there saying that this sounds like a great idea. Let's do it. So we were able to take over this whole second floor of the Cal EPA building for the summit, and it was well attended. The summit outcomes, we had policy recommendations that GIS data be provided when these public notices get sent to tribes. And also, instead of just land back, that we also include the water, like the water rights. If we're doing co-stewardship, then it's not just one person has the water rights. It needs to be both entities. We need to promote GIS data sovereignty in tribal engagement and consultation process. We need to allow for what we call ground truthing, rematriation, TEK, and decolonizing mapping when it comes to public natural resource management and planning and decision making. And funding for the tribes for GIS-based training and software. We need to really focus on getting that going for both federally and non-federally recognized tribes. The federally recognized tribes have some things going for them in regards to that through the Bureau of Indian Affairs. California tribal lands, when we say California tribal lands, we also need to include not just reservations, rancherias, but also public domain allotment lands, and make sure to include them on the public maps, such as fire maps and flood maps and environmental maps. We had a great event, and it was great networking and sharing. We have, like I said, they recommended to have another summit, which we actually are going to be doing that later on next year. When we started the summit, one of the things you have to think about is it's not all about the science of GIS and data collection and that information. That's important, but also with tribes, it's really good to start off with a tribal opening, but also focusing on tribal or traditional ecological knowledge. And so we had a really wonderful keynote speaker, Jennifer Malone. She's a Wukchumni elder and traditional basket weaver. She's also on the board for California Indian Basket Weavers Association, CIBA, and she really explained a lot about the time to harvest basket materials, the native plant cycle, and also the impact of cultural burns, a good fire on these plants, making them very healthy in the life cycle, and protection of those basket materials. Making sure to get permission to document and map from the tribes, indigenous approval, building of trust with new technologies is important, teaching our young tribal youth of TEK, work with tribal elders and listen to their cultural stories. And the design of a basket is what the basket materials are telling you. If anything, I learned that from her, and it's well said. Okay, so moving on to the mapping world of our summit, a couple of presentations that really stood out to me, and one was by Randall Race Richards. He's with the Tuoladi Nation, and I'm going to get a little more into his presentation, but I thought he did a really great job, very advanced, very knowledgeable in GIS and all the different tools, and he actually from the ground up also has built his knowledge base and is really advanced in the use of GIS technologies, and he's really helping out his tribe quite a bit. And then Crystal West, I can't say enough about her. She's just a wonderful individual who's a researcher, and she's works with the North Fork Mono tribe, and they were working on decolonizing some maps for a trail, and I'll be talking about that here real soon. Another couple other workshops that stood out as well is with Kent State University. They were focusing on land back and using remote sensory technology, teaching folks how to use Google Earth Engine, and again, focusing on land back in California. And they also did some literature review in regards to that. And through the literature review, they created this mind map, which is very, very interesting. It looks pretty close to what is happening out in California for tribes in regards to land back. And on the right, University of California, Berkeley, they had a workshop called Co-Equal, which is collaboratory for equity and water allocation. And they utilized Mentimeter, a live survey tool, to ask the question about the 30 plus participants in their workshop, both tribal and non-tribal in there, about the relationship to water. And so a word cloud was created regards to the responses, and very, very interesting, the feedback that they got. And they're continuing to work with tribes. They have a workshop being planned early December at Buena Vista Rancheria. So they are definitely working with tribes, as is Kent State University. They're going to be doing another workshop too at Sac State University, probably in February of 2026. Okay, there is getting back to the Tolowa Day Nation uses of GIS. There's Randall Richards. He's, again, the GIS specialist for that tribe. And in case you don't know, their tribe is located way up in the far west corner, Del Norte County there in California. And their tribe straddles the two states of California and Oregon. And here is a map that's more of a tribal map description in their language. They have their various locations and village sites located there, their waterways. And so, again, they're continuing to improve on their GIS environment and taking ownership of their GIS data. And Randall mentioned there's the ways of using GIS in their scientific surveys, monitoring, managing, land surveying for tribal properties. They're using information for public relations, their tribal heritage, culture, and indigenous traditional knowledge preservation and digitalization. And while they're all doing this, they're ensuring the data sovereignty, and they're building in their own in-house capacity as a nation while doing this. I thought he was a really great presenter. So yeah, and then you get into the decolonizing of maps and ground truthing. and Crystal West, who I said is a really great researcher. On the right here is a typical forest map, a colonial map, which has, non-traditional descriptions there. And so the task here was the Mono tribe, North Fork Mono tribe, wanted to map out the Naomi Trail in California. And that trail is located northeast of Fresno, and it goes all the way from the foothills to the Mammoth Lakes area. So it goes across the Sierras. And so they wanted to take a look at that map and then be able to draw out some of their significant archaeological sites and also some of the allotment lands, and build up more of a tribal view of the mapping world. And so they were able to do this by looking at some of the researches that were done by some of their own folks way back when. Haini Noon and Bame Wisu. These folks had done some research on some of the tribal namings of the places. And then they also looked at the interdisciplinary mapping and tribal knowledge. So they were looking at the botany, the ethnography, the archaeology, the wildlife, the file management, the ecology and hydrology, the aquatic biology. So all this was in consideration of their mapping. And so then this is where they get out on the ground there and actually walk the earth there, the ground, the trails. They do observation of what they're seeing, and they're confirming the route. And there's the view from looking west from the top of the Mammoth Mountain towards Pawanini Shut-Eye Peak. So they have both the tribal name description as well as the colonial name. And then they get into looking at some of the historic maps here. Don't know if you know, but way back when, with all these routes that we as tribal people had established, which I'll also start, we got to give credit to the animals, the deer, the elk, the bear. We humans knew that, hey, we need to follow those trails because they're good ones. But also what happens later is you get these folks that are non-tribal coming into California, or the area known as California. And here is the Mariposa Battalion campaign routes. So the military folks use the routes as well. And there's another map here of that of 1957 mapping of the battalion routes. And then you look at 1890, you have the Yosemite National Park starts to map out the trails. And so you see that set up. And also you see there's going to be the French trails also were included as well in that. Then you get into the early ethnography, and this is important. It probably wasn't until about 2014 when AB 52 in California, that bill was passed. It included ethnography focus in public planning of lands. So that is important. It's the telling of our story. So this is a map in 1932 of the North Fork hamlets, and Gifford was the creator of this map. And so it does outline those village sites and hamlets. And so you take all this information and you walk the earth, you walk the ground, you observe, you've taken historic information, archaeological information, ethnography, and you start to get to this type of map. And so let's see what else. Oh, and then the archaeological information. They know there's been obsidian found, there's grinding rocks located. This map was done in 1959 by Hines. And so there's indication, obviously, that there were certainly human beings there from the past. And so, yeah, some village sites. Next thing is, again, ground truthing. There is Jess Valdez of the North Fork Mono tribe. He really helped out with Crystal West, who did a lot of the map research, but he did a lot of the ground research. And he encouraged us to get away from our computers. It's important to get out on the landscape, taking a look at food sources that are out there, animals, the water, sounds and smells, pay attention. Connecting sites and places with the landscape's important. So yeah, he's doing a great job. And so when you talk about decolonizing mapping, their approach is very similar to a lot of other tribal approaches in California. And so from from the bottom up, you're looking at your base maps, your existing modern maps of today, the topo maps, the aerial maps. Maybe an organization has a map like U.S. Forest Service. And then you start to look at your stories, your Naomi stories, and your place, your names, doing some geo-referencing along the way of old historic maps, and then the ethnographic villages and historic allotment maps if you have them, any archaeological sites that are recorded, and then you start to do the ground truthing and walking the land and that. So that's kind of the layers of effort, and I think that's very common when we're working within the California area. I'm sure out of state, other tribes have gone through this process as well in creating their indigenous maps. Okay, so we started off with this and then they end up with this. So it was a very good effort. And I really encourage you, if you could, to take a look at the webinar that was presented by North Fork Mono Tribe. They did a much better presentation than I did here in so many minutes. Tribes are also using story maps to tell their story, aligning it with maps as well as the indigenous knowledge. And so we're really moving forward. We'll probably in our next Tribal Summit, we'll probably have competition on best story maps by tribes of California. So we'll see how that goes. Yeah, so anyway, I'm going to take a little bit of a turn here and talk a little bit about GIS data sovereignty, because that was a focus in the summit as well. And I will say that Louis Curson Mayorga, he was a former student of UC Berkeley, and he at the time worked for United Auburn Rancheria up there in northern California. And I liked his comparison chart on Let's Talk About Tribal Values. And I won't go through each one of these, but because we're running out of time. But the archaeological descriptions sometimes certainly are pretty black and white at times, and it's coming from that discipline. I get it. But then on the left side is the tribal perspective of that description of the archaeological view. So what archaeological views say is sites or scientific data sources. And then on the tribal side, we see sites as sacred living places with ongoing meaning. And then let's drop down to excavation and curation are standard treatment. And then we say no damage occurs when sites are excavated or curated without consent. So you can see kind of the comparison. And I think the audience was really drawn into this particular perspective. And again, it has a lot to do with how we look at data sovereignty. And then the other thing is, if you ever go to a tribe, you want to work for a tribe, especially one that's federally recognized and they've got their GIS kind of going, usually that's housed at the Tribal Historic Preservation Office. And there's Tribal Council at the top, and you have your Tribal Historic Preservation Committee maybe set up, and they work in conjunction with the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, who helps out with the tribal heritage, the cultural regulatory, and the Native American Graves Repatriation Act, known as NAGPRA. So this is kind of the setting that's typical within a TIPO program. And again, in compliance with AB 52 and Section 106, these are some of the guidelines that are required for the data sovereignty element in a tribe. My data sovereignty model, it's pretty complex, but I've been pushing it out there on the very top. Again, similar to what Lewis has, is at the very top, you have your tribal governance. On the left side, hopefully you document your GIS environment. On the right side, GIS training and information sharing and access, all that needs to be understood. And whether or not you're using ISRI or QGIS or any other product that might be cloud-based or locally, make sure you have storage needs addressed, your backup recovery, security, that's all in place. In California, though, when it comes to natural resources, the 4 quad areas I always focus on are you have public data that you can get to very easily, no, not a problem. Then you have your lower left where you have to request for that information, like the California Historic Records Information Act. They have a system, they have data that you can request. Up in the upper right quad there's tribal generated data that comes from our GPS fieldwork, maybe photos, ethnography, recordings, videos, and some of that, you want to kind of keep together, maybe share or not. And then the lower right is very sensitive data, such as cultural site, cultural gathering, cultural monitoring, and traditional language, and other things that might be in the lower right, and that you really want to safeguard, okay? And there's a text description of what I just went over for my model. And there's all kinds of resources for when you look at data sovereignty, and this one comes from the National Indian Justice Center. Really good description. I can't say enough about a great job they did putting this together, and security measures. That's if you're an IT manager, you probably really understand and relate to that. And then there's also tribal data sovereignty. Good resources here. University of Arizona has a couple of good areas. There's even UC Berkeley has an Indigenous data sovereignty area. United Nations, of course, Development Program, UNDP. They have some recommendations. And yeah, so there's that. Finally, the summit is coming up 2026 in the green. These are things we'd like go. We're moving on it. We're already doing the potential site already is confirmed now at this point. Redlands University, 21st, 22nd, 26th is probably going to be free. I'm hoping. Right now, we're putting out the request for registration. My website is www.catribalgis.org. A reminder of all the past 2025 summit information's available. So I'll make sure I try to get this PDF file out to you guys. I want to thank you for all the work that you guys are doing out there in the GIS world. I don't want to take time for our other co-presenter. I just want to let you know that these are my current projects I'm working on. I'm affiliated with the California Geographical Information Association as a board member, and also with Women in GIS. And I really, again, thank you for the opportunity to present here at your wonderful UC GIS week. I'm hoping you're having a good one. Wow, one heart. Yay. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Donna Miranda Begay. That was excellent. I know I certainly learned quite a bit. I think we can have time for one or two questions right now before we move over to Char's presentation. And then if you have questions that come up during then, of course, we can ask more questions after Char's presentation as well. I do want to ask you, how can those of us that are non-native researchers in the UC help support you in the work of California Tribal GIS? And sort of in line with that, how can we stay abreast and plugged into this work going on in the space?
Yeah, just shoot me an email at donnabegay@yahoo.com and let me know maybe like what you're doing, what kind of research you're doing, what your interests are. For me, the GIS Summit is really kind of the best way right now to help. These other projects right now, a lot of it, like the writing team for the governor's office on truth and healing, that's really my insight knowledge. I can't really reach out to anybody on that. Same thing with the governor's office, but when it comes to putting on that summit, certainly if you guys hit up the summit webpage there for requests for registration, we're just looking right now for ideas. Even if you don't come, I mean, that's okay. Or you just want to apply, join virtually. We would love your insight, like you want to learn this, so just let us know. And that's one good way of helping out. But yeah, I'm always looking for maybe some insight volunteer work. Most of the stuff I do is I teach at the intro level in GIS to tribes.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. And for folks in attendance, I just dropped the link to the Tribal Summit uh, webpage in the chat if you'd like to go check that out. And maybe time for one question before we move over to Char's presentation. All right. In that case, Char, why don't you start up your presentation? Char comes to us from UC Berkeley and is going to talk to us about relational ontologies.
Hello. Okay, share my screen briefly. Okay. Hi everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Begay, for that talk and all the work that you're doing with California Tribal GIS. My name's Shar. My project is about rethinking the z-axis and looking more at relational ways of being in vertical worlds. And before I get started, I wanted to just do a major disclaimer is that my project is not Indigenous geographies. And I'm a little confused on why I was put in this block with people who are doing like real work in Indigenous geographies, whereas my project is more about being like extremely impacted by the magnitude of relationality in vertical landscapes, and trying to use that to really think outside of colonial boundaries and mapping, and to use those thoughts in that process in order to reimagine what our world can look like when we think about it more relationally. But it is not at the level of work that like Dr. Begay is doing on actual like things that are impacting Indigenous communities and tribal nations. So I just wanted to do a disclaimer on that and talk a little bit about my project, and its more kind of esoteric foundations. So that's just a disclaimer. And then on the right hand side here, I just have a list of people that have been really impactful in the ways that I think about relationality, and people who are actually doing Indigenous geographies. So that's just a quick disclaimer before I get into my work. So today I want to talk about, I'm going to start off with, what are vertical and volumetric landscapes, going into the cartographic standards that we're using currently to represent those landscapes, and then some of my own experiences and the reason why I came to this work in the first place with looking at representations of Janu, which is an incredible mountain in northeastern Nepal, and then talk more about co-constituting space and existing in the vertical and the method and the place aspect of things. But this is really like a way for me as a first-year PhD student to bring these ideas to people who have interest in them and really get feedback and kind of inspire cartographic inquiry outside of the bounds of mapping that we're used to. So just a little bit about me. Before I came to the PhD program, I was working as a professional mountain guide. So I was doing a lot of just work in vertical terrain using technical systems and risk assessment to teach and move people through that terrain safely. And I specialized in rock and alpine climbing. So a lot of my work was on teaching students how to navigate glaciated peaks, protect crack systems, climb blank faces, like all of these really different aspects of existing in vertical terrain. And a lot of the places that I've worked are completely different relationally with all of the different ecology and geology and human interaction that goes on in those places. So it really got me to ask a lot of questions about what we're doing and how we're doing it. Again, just going over my goals is kind of an opportunity to explain my research, inspire y'all's cartographic inquiry, and then engage with each other about ideas and feedback. So to get started, I want to explain what I'm talking about, which is vertical and volumetric terrain. So the vertical is kind of this space that is that exists in this z-axis, and I'll get into that later. But I'm specifically talking about geomorphologically produced vertical relief in mountains and mountainscapes. So that's kind of this is the rock aspect. I'm considering the vertical to be more of the like vertical cliff sides. And then the volumetric is what I'm considering more with ice and water. So here we've got pictures of on the right is a glacier. It's called the Silver Star Glacier in Washington State. And then on the left here, there's a frozen ice waterfall in the Canadian Rockies. And you can see there's a very small person up there for scale. But these are landscapes where volume is the main thing that you would be considering and trying to understand how to map them. And specifically with glaciers, you're looking at volume that is this chronology of an extremely long time and can tell us so much about the world in all those states of that time, which I think is really interesting. And here's kind of a combo of the two. This is Kanchenjunga in Nepal. It's the third highest mountain in the world. And you can see here that we have an immense amount of vertical relief. And then the mountainside, the north side of the mountain is just has glaciers all over it. And then the tongue of the glacier is coming out there. And that's kind of what you can see in the foreground. And that's all ice. So what's the z-axis? When we think about mapping, so much of what we think about when we use is this top-down perspective. And in order to think about mapping outside of those colonial boundaries, we're thinking more about, okay, well, how do you, as Dr. Breguet mentioned, how do you map from the bottom up, and how do you map more relationally is kind of what I'm really trying to figure out. And I see the z-axis as a space to do that in. If we try to consider more like looking at those landscapes not as this all-seeing view, but as the thing that really conveys the magnitude of those landscapes. And the X and Y being like traditional like latitude and longitude, the coordinate planes that we operate on and that GIS systems operate on in order to do our mapping or in order to do our everyday lives. So current cartographic standards, these are just a few that I'm mentioning. They're not all of them, but from what I have experienced and what I've mentioned previously is these standards are embedded in this two-dimensional top-down colonial perspective that really holds the possibilities of that z-axis of that vertical world at bay. You can see this first one, topography, is a way that you can convey that three-dimensional aspect on the ground, but what you're doing is you're flattening the world. And even on cartographic or on topographic maps, the actual vertical parts of the map are much more proximally close together. They're compressed. So you can see that that's a place that you cannot go, but you can't see what that place actually looks like. All you can see is that it's extremely small. The lines are extremely close together. And it just lends to being like, okay, well, that terrain is not terrain that you're actually going to look at because you can't necessarily navigate through it. Other historic things that have been used, hatching and shading, which is really beautiful. And that's the second picture down on the right. And that's been used in a lot of maps that are more small scale, so zoomed out to show how different mountain ranges move and the verticality in that dimension, but they add more texture, but there's still that top down. And then digital elevation models, which is a more present day thing that we're using satellite imagery to get images of the Earth from above and then use those to produce the relief. And you can see in this model, it's, they're using like a color gradient for that. And sometimes you can generate, a lot of the work that I've done is generating contour intervals and topographic maps from digital elevation modules, which is what I'll get into now in talking about the Johnny problem, which is something that really inspired me to think a lot more about this work, which is in November of 2024, I had the opportunity to go to the Himalaya with Professor Kurt Cuffey at UC Berkeley and be an assistant guide on the trip as well as a cartographer for after the trip to make these maps. And the trip was to focus on looking at debris-covered glaciers. And when I got back and I was creating the maps of this space, I was using remote sensing to build these contours and these contour intervals. And something that I noticed, and I used satellites from all over the world, from many nations, many countries, trying so hard to figure this out. But I could not get an accurate representation of the north face of Janu, which is, if you look at the image on the left here, I don't know if y'all can see my mouse, but if you look at the image on the left, the north face of Janu is this, it's kind of all the way on the left here, and it's got this big, beautiful swoop And the communities in this area, liken this mountain to like a hawk, that's like looking down into the valleys. And the mountain that you see that's 10,000 feet of vertical relief. I don't know if you all are familiar with El Cap in Yosemite, but that's about 3,500 feet. So that's 3 times the size of El Capitan in Yosemite is how large this face is. That's the scale of these mountains. And I'm doing more mapping of the Himalaya now, and this is a persistent problem in trying to remotely sense terrain that is so vast and so condensed and voluminous, just in the aspects of the glaciers, but as well as the sheer amount of mountains in that area. It's really challenging, and it just got me thinking a lot about how this top-down perspective, I already considered it having all of these issues, but then, when you're actually trying to do a technical mapping component and you can't get that information, I feel like it's a very apt example of where those technologies are failing, and where you can't understand the magnitude of a landscape like this from a top-down perspective. And then I just wanted to talk about other kinds of mapping, right? So I went into some more current cartographic standards with topography and hatching and DEMs. But in a lot of what I've been experiencing in these landscapes, I'm using maps like this to figure out how I'm going to experience the landscape and how I'm going to move through it. So this is a map of the Triple Direct, which is a route on El Cap. And then on the right, you can see an image of me climbing. You can kind of see, it's kind of towards the top of the lines on the very far right side of the image of the topo. This is what climbers call these topos. And I think what's really interesting is this is a more relational way to engage with the landscape, but it's for an entirely different purpose. And that's something that I think is intriguing. Like, we have all these efforts to use maps as a medium to represent vertical worlds in their respective knowledge areas, but they're all embedded in and deeply siloed within this Cartesian perspective. And I consider vertical space as a landscape sitting outside of that current ontology. And I feel like it presents a chance to represent the world within the context of its own relationships. And you can kind of see that starting to happen a bit within these topos, where you can see foliage and you can see maybe there's like a bush, or there's like, this is a big ledge, and that's how you can experience it. You can sleep on that ledge, or you can use that tree to make it a little bit easier to get up, but it doesn't actually convey the magnitude of the entanglements that are happening in those landscapes. And then I wanted to talk more about this GPS limitations in the vertical as well. And this is just an example of me trying to use GPS to track my movement. And what I've noticed is that, they overly focus on the location of body in space from that X and Y axis. And they're trying to flatten this experience in the vertical that, obviously, as you can see from the map on the far left, does not convey the actuality of moving through that space. On the far right, you'll see an image. That's me and a few colleagues on the top of this mountain in the middle. And the mountain in the middle is on the far left, kind of where this red marker is. And we did not go zigzagging all around the drainages and to these other 3 peaks. We were just on the side of this mountain. So it just shows this kind of abstraction, how even contemporary GPS can't really locate the body in space. And so I wanted to talk about this co-constitution of space that I think existing in the vertical can really lend us to a different perspective. What we find in these spaces is that geologies, ecologies, and biologies they're operating with this increasing entanglement And that entanglement is under the influence of the consequences of gravity. So all these things are holding each other together. And if they don't, the landscape will fall. And so, using that as a point of inquiry, like how can we think about these landscapes differently and convey them in a way that conveys their magnitude as well as how they're being affected in our changing world. And so these are kind of the entities that I'm really trying to combine in this experimentation. And I see it as a constellation that would put into conversation conceptions of space, and knowledge production and order, and situated knowledges, to quote Donna Haraway. And then pulling in kind of like that geographic theory on verticality and volume, and this historic and contemporary arc in verticality and cartography, and then entangling all of that through this lens, this biophysical geographic phenomena lens, vertical, geomorphologically produced, and ecologically diverse terrain. So to do that, I intend to use my ability to exist in those spaces, and investigate those entanglements and the actual movement of existing in that terrain and climbing that terrain. You have to engage with those interstitial zones that hold the landscape together. For instance, I talked about triple direct on LCAP earlier, but LCAP in general is well researched for many purposes, for rockfall hazards, for lichen species, peregrine falcon nests, monkey flower habitats, and climbing routes. But all of those things co-create and shape one another. And looking at it from a relational perspective would help to conceptualize the space itself and inform a contemporary cartographic meshing of historical methods, present data, and cartographic experimentation for a changing world. Other ideas that I potentially have in this space is looking at the Arctic and kind of mapping and glaciers specifically, because recently in my work I've been thinking a lot about glaciers as this icon of global climate change. And when people, I was in a class the other day where everyone was like, okay, what do you think when you think about glaciers? And everyone was like, polar bears and climate change and sea ice melting. And what does it mean when we have a conception of something that really takes away any of the actual context of what those things are and how they move through space and what they do to space? Another issue I'm thinking about is the Himalaya, and I've already mentioned that with the Johnny problem that I discussed earlier, but as well as the Karakoram effect, which is that in the Karakoram, which is a mountain range that's very close to the Himalaya, which is over the border in Pakistan, that's one of the only mid-latitude places in the world where glaciers are still growing, and people don't really know why that is. And then Yosemite Valley, which is kind of just the most apt example of really dramatic vertical relief in the United States. It's very maybe easier to access. So yeah, those are my thoughts. I would love to hear your thoughts on my presentation and on these questions of verticality and relationality. And I can maybe just go back to these kinds of questions that I'm thinking about, creating relational mapping systems based in critical cartographic theory that allow for both the different representation and epistemological shift in how we understand the world through vertical and volumetric landscapes. And then how might that system better represent the dynamics of this rapidly shifting world that we're in? So yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Shar. Definitely opened my eyes, definitely gave me a lot to think about. How about we give a big round of applause for both of our excellent presenters in this session, and we're ready to open the floor for a few questions. Questions, responses, comments, feedback. And you can always leave a question in the chat or raise your Zoom hand and unmute yourself. I know I'm curious if something like VR, like augmented reality tools, are something that comes up in this conversation as something to explore. I know those have their own issues, but I'm curious, what are some of your thoughts on tools like that?
Yeah, I think those tools are super valuable in a lot of different contexts, and I think when I think about VR, augmented reality, or something I didn't really mention in my presentation, but LiDAR, which is kind of on a similar vein where you're really focusing in on this area and mapping with this insane amount of detail that can show that space, but it's so computationally heavy and it doesn't actually like convey the ecological kind of aspects of what I'm really trying to focus on. And it still uses those, like ideally in my dreamscape, I wouldn't need to use colonial Cartesian grids in order to create these representations of these landscapes. Like really, how do you operate outside of it all completely? And that kind of technology is still very much situated within that.
Absolutely. And that's why I was so curious what your response on that would be. We have a question from Audrey in the chat as well, asking if you can speak more to the difference between vertical volumetric spaces and the implications of this differentiation.
That's a great question. Thank you, Audrey. Yeah, this is something I'm still trying to figure out and it's my own definitions, right? I consider, you know, vertical landscapes to be and like for simplification purposes, I'm thinking about cliff sides, right? And when I'm thinking about volume, I'm thinking about this aggregation over time of more dynamic elements. So not geology, but more like water and ice and how those things build up. Um, but but they go together. And I'm still trying to figure out if it is wise to have a differentiation within that and how to represent them in a way that can show how these things move together throughout time to create the landscapes that we operate in now. But to answer the question simply, I guess I think more of volume as like ice and water and things that are like things that fill up a space. Whereas I think more the verticality is the boundaries of that fill.
And I think we have time for maybe one more question. In that case, let's do one final round of applause for our two excellent, excellent presenters today. I know I certainly got a lot out of this. I encourage you all to join us for our two remaining sessions this afternoon. At 2 p.m., we have a GIS grab bag session, and at 3 p.m., a session on campus operations and collaborations, as well as another full day of programming tomorrow. Oh, Philip's got a hand. Go ahead, Philip. You can go ahead and unmute to ask a question, Philip. Oh, no question. Okay. Yeah, so otherwise, enjoy the rest of your GIS week programming if you're able to attend. We have our feedback survey in the chat as well, if you'd be so kind as to take a few minutes to fill that out. And otherwise, happy GIS week and happy mapping.
Thank y'all.